This media is brought to you by Polyscope.
In the realm of tomorrow, where techniques mind, we ponder, we dream.
All right.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us here on Think Future. My name is Chris Kalaboukis, and once again, we're coming at you live from deep in the heart of Silicon Valley, California. We have a very special guest for us here today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about tell us your name, a little bit about yourself, and what you're passionate about?
Sure. Chris, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. My name is Gaurab Bansal. I lead an organization called Responsible Innovation Labs. Tell you a little bit about our origin story and what we do. Fundamentally, we believe and we're passionate about helping founders build great businesses. And we're doing it through this lens and this idea of, what does responsible innovation look like in 2026, as it's now 2026? And fundamentally, we believe like this is a different era. And the playbook that worked for Silicon Valley for the last 3 decades is still essential, but there are many macro factors and even micro trends that we think are pushing founders to have to build differently. So I'll tell you a little bit about our origin story. We were incubated by General Catalyst, obviously a very prominent VC, and started by alumni from Stripe. Your listeners are probably very familiar with those two names.
Who doesn't know Stripe?
We do a lot of work in the policy world, and so I always have to sort of remind people that Stripe is powering the economic infrastructure of the internet.
Exactly.
But your listeners already know that. So we do 3 things at RIL. One is we strive to prepare founders for the trade-offs ahead. Obviously, to borrow from YC, like make something people want is still quite essential. But if you're building consequential technology, inevitably you're building at the technical edge. You're outpacing regulation most likely, and you're probably encountering friction or will encounter friction. It's inevitable if you're really consequential, whether it's with regulators, whether it's with civil society, whether it's with communities. We can go down the list of that. And we think it's important that founders are ready for those trade-offs. And so our job for our founder-facing work is to prepare them. We also bridge founders with the stakeholders that they're going to impact and vice versa. We think these are the stakeholders that shape the environment, and then they can really help founders win. But it's important to kind of get founders out of their silos and get those stakeholders out of their silos. And then lastly, we're trying to prove over time what responsible innovation actually looks like and means in practice. We're a firm believer that responsibility is not like a zero sum. It's not like some sort of 100% perfection. It is not zero risk, but it is usually a mindset and a methodology that helps founders move faster over time. So prepare, bridge, and prove. And that's really what we're up to.
And what would you say your definition of responsible is, like as applied to innovation then?
Well, again, I think we see technology, like, again, you can come up with the idea in your pitch deck and maybe it came to your company because it's your life's project or you have this glaring problem you're trying to solve. Ultimately, you're dropping your technology into like a society, whether it's a business organism, if you're selling to enterprise, or into a community, or into a user's phone or laptop. And how that technology actually interacts with people and systems is not necessarily how you imagined it would be. And that will lead to all sorts of things. I mean, we can go through the list of all the great companies we see today, whether it's Uber and sort of their impact on regulated markets and monopolies, Airbnb and its impact on, whether it's users and their experience with discrimination or housing markets. I mean, these are all points of friction that come for these companies. And that is probably not what people were thinking about when they did the original pitch deck.
No,
and I would argue
not.
that those are 2 consequential companies.
Yeah. In fact, I would say it would be the opposite. They were looking at more of a permissionless model where we say, like, let's push this thing out there and see what happens, even if it does go beyond regulation. In fact, hasn't that been going on for a long time?
Oh, sure. I mean, and I would say we at RIL, we believe in permissionless innovation, and it is an important part of what makes Silicon Valley and the American tech ecosystem like as singular as it is. And I think to preserve permissionless innovation, I think it's incumbent on founders to look around corners in ways that they probably do in other aspects of their business. But we think it's incumbent on founders now, if you want to win, you have to bring some of that looking around corners instinct to other parts of the business, and you have to do it earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fundamentally like this mindset and methodology that we believe, like you have to move fast. Speed is essential. Like that is not negotiable. And so I think some of these things are like, how do we help founders avoid the time, economic, reputation costs that can come at you fast in today's world if you're not thinking about that friction, to be honest. So I think it's not responsibility is not I don't have a pithy definition for you. It's going to look different based on what sector you're in. It's going to look different based on your stage. So that's why we describe it more as methodology and mindset of like, this is how you build a great company in 2026.
Right. But would you say that something like it, I mean, Uber's a great example because everybody knows exactly what happened there, more or less. And would a company like Uber using the same techniques still be as successful as they are today, or has the world changed?
Look, I think not having sat at Uber, I want to be mindful of like what I say and don't say here. I don't know how they made their decisions. I think, look, ultimately they have a product that has a tremendous user base. I mean, again, to
Mm-hmm.
borrow from YC, like they've made something that people want, and I think that really matters today. So I don't see why they wouldn't be successful if they were just starting out today, assuming nobody had come up with that innovation before. And Lyft, their competitor, is also, in some obviously smaller market share relative to Uber, but they are building a viable business. So it seems to me that that matters. But I think if you look at the way they're running their businesses today, it seems to me from the outside looking in, I won't name companies here, but I think both companies are looking at driver safety quite seriously, passenger safety quite seriously, things that perhaps they weren't thinking about before. By the way, those are still stubborn issues that stay with these companies.
Sure.
Right. And so I think my guess, like stepping out of those two specifically, is the pattern we've seen over the last, let's say, 10, 15 years is move fast, scale quickly. And if you didn't deal with sort of stubborn friction, it only gets more expensive to deal with it the more successful you are.
Mm-hmm.
And the harms and externalities just make it more expensive for you as a company. It doesn't go away. And so I
Yeah.
think the theory and thesis we're trying to figure out is if you build a little differently, given this is a different era than it was 10, 15 years ago, what might that mean for endurance and frankly, time, cost? Like most of these companies don't want to spend money on lawyers. God bless lawyers. They don't spend money on lobbyists. They want to spend money on product.
Exactly.
And innovation. And I think a lot of this stuff can be distracting if you haven't dealt with it appropriately in the right way.
But would you say that, so I'm not talking specifically about Uber today or something like that, but a similar model where we're pushing beyond regulation, say something that's borderline, not super legal, but it's kind of like, well, it's a gray area. We don't know what's going on there, but it does serve a need and it does serve it well. I mean, company A does that. Company B sort of sits back and says, let's be more responsible about this. Yeah. I mean, are we going to see more success in what, A or B?
Well, I think I actually would love to challenge you on that framing because let's come back to the proposition of at the technical product edge, you're generally outpacing. So company A and company B are both in a gray area. To us, responsibility is not like necessarily constraining yourself, right? I mean, although I would argue constraints can help.
Sure.
I'll just side note.
I love constraints, by the way. I think
one of the most famous design constraints, that actually turned into an incredible, and you could say what you will about SpaceX, but reusability of rockets is an incredible design constraint they imposed on themselves. Mm-hmm. And it turns out to be a game changer for bringing the cost down, not just for them, but for their customers. And they have a dominant position. So I'll come back to, I think constraints can be useful in thinking about what responsibility means, but it can be out of style in Silicon Valley, notwithstanding SpaceX and their success with reusability. But let's come back to what responsibility looks like when you're out on the technical edge and you're outpacing regulation. What we would say to companies is, there's no one size fits all answer. I think we would say 8 out of 10 times it behooves you as a founder to engage with regulators. Doesn't mean you have to do what they say, but you have to communicate proactively in good faith your point of view. And if you just put your head in the sand and just wait for them to come to you, they will think largely you don't care, that you don't have a point of view, and you're not serious. And again, that just increases your costs and friction versus whether it's company A or company B is saying, this is what we think is responsible. This is how we're making those trade-offs. This is what it means for our customers. And this is what it means for you, the policymaker, the regulator, the civil society group. I think if you come to the table in good faith to say, we have a point of view on those answers, it doesn't mean you will see eye to eye. It's a very different place to start a conversation. Versus when I go to Sacramento, when I go to Washington, D.C., I think the general perception from politicians and policymakers is that, and often this is, I would say, largely because of the actions of big tech and startup founder predecessors, it's like founders don't care. And I think when I meet founders, I actually think they do care. So they're inheriting an environment that's not of their creation, but it's their problem.
Right.
And so I think I come back to your question of like, whether it's company A, company B, it's much more about having a point of view, communicating that assertively, thoughtfully. And it doesn't mean zero risk. It doesn't mean you're 100% in legal compliance, because probably those laws don't exist. But it is having thought through those trade-offs in a way that puts you in a position of strength and not in a position of like weakness and being reactive.
Actually, that makes a lot of sense, especially nowadays as we're looking at more audience first businesses, right? So instead of going out there and building something and throwing it out there based on a certain set of market demographics that you're trying to hit, it's kind of like, well, let's look at everybody who's going to be affected by this before we throw it out there. Right?
Well, and I mean, you can't, again, if I were advising a founder, I'm like, you can't boil the ocean, right? At some point you do have to put something out there.
Right.
But I'll come back to, an example we're seeing, and I'll speak in more generalized sense here and not about specific companies, but we see obviously the rise of the AI companion and chatbot and some, sort of these show up in a lot of different iterations. And in my view of the technical founder, the business founder is, you're really smart. You're probably, very brilliant to build this sort of incredible technology, and you're applying it clearly in a place, in a circumstance that's not regulated. And to me, you should have the foresight to say, well, there's probably some things that could go wrong, particularly with kids.
Mm-hmm.
And you could set up some guardrails before you get sued. And I think what the pattern we see is people need to be sued to set up the guard. You could it's so fascinating that within 24 hours, 48 hours, they're able to spin up guardrails and put them on their site. And it's like, I mean, don't tell me, to me, that's laziness. Mm-hmm. It's not excellence. It's the opposite of excellence in innovation, right?
Can they argue that they didn't see it coming? I mean, in some ways.
I mean, if you're smart enough to build this world-changing technology, you can't predict every outcome. And the point of this work and our push and pull, our job is to be a critical friend with founders, right? The point is not to predict the future. You can't, and you'll get bogged down and you'll slow yourself down. And that's not going to help anybody, right? The question is, what can you reasonably foresee? And you have to do something with that information. Maybe you choose not to do something with it. That's up to the founder. That's up to the business, right? But I think one of the things I've learned from some of the predecessors to today's founders is part of these challenges wasn't because people had bad values. It's because they didn't go and find the right information. And then once they started to learn how to go find that right information, a lot of these predecessor companies, I would argue, didn't have the decision frameworks to do something with it. And so I think our job at RIL, and we would argue with investors and with founders, is how do we help you find better information? How do we help give you the tools to make those trade-offs? And sometimes you still may end up in the same place, but you've made yourself more resilient by having your act together. And I think the pattern we're trying to interrupt is, what I would call why we couldn't possibly have thought of that. Now, sometimes that may be true, but look, these are real. I've interacted with enough founders to know these are very, very smart people. Who are bold and brilliant and have this wonderful instinct to build something that doesn't exist today. With that kind of imagination, I know that people can see ahead.
Right. But how much thought is put into that piece of it? Is it just sort of driven to like, this is what we want to put it out. We want to see what happens, or are you guys the ones that actually expand the mindset to look at the rest of the audiences that are going to be affected by this?
Well, again, I think it partly depends on stage, right? Because I think I'm trying to remind the founders we work with that none of this matters if you don't win,
Hmm.
right? So, like, you can be the most responsible person. You're trying to build a business at the end of the day, right? So,
Yeah.
you're going to have to put your product out into the world. The question is, again, even if you ask yourself a very simple question of what's the worst thing that's going to happen with this particular launch, or if I ship this thing, and if the answer is, a set of risks that you're willing to live with, like, so be it. At least you've asked
Hmm.
the question, you've kind of had it. It doesn't mean that this idea is going to win the day in every conversation. Your go-to-market's important, right? Your part of this is customer discovery. What features are they going to like, et cetera, et cetera? What is my enterprise customer going to do? But if you ask these questions, even if you spend like 30 minutes doing, like when I was in government, you would call it like a tabletop exercise or scenario planning, war gaming, whatever, red teaming, you can call it all kinds of things. If the information yields something that could be, whether it's harmful or not what you intend, or it's not what you want your brand to be associated with, or it's going to just create a bunch of financial risk for you, I think you have to ask yourself the question, right? But I think that's one thing, right now, I think the playbook that we see is product, everything beyond product is noise.
Mm.
And I think that is like still like 80-90% true.
Right.
But I think this is a much more complicated world than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Right.
And
Exactly
frankly,
right. So,
again, let's talk about it. I'll just want to just sort of interject. Like, if I look at public polling on AI at a time when I would say in America in particular, we need to be deploying AI more, public polling is like deeply skeptical of AI.
hmm hmm
And that is widespread. That is across across ideologies, across parties. And again, I think if we think as a tech ecosystem that me having the best widget is going to win the day, I mean, I think that I'm not sure that's a strategy. Let me put it that way.
Well, has it ever been true? I mean, most best widgets at any point in time in any kind of technology don't typically win the day, right? There's
Well,
all
certainly
sorts
being
of other
first is
factors.
not all right. I think we can go through the
Being
list of
first
a
is
bunch of
definitely
these
not right.
companies. Yeah, being first has its disadvantages, as we've seen in recent history, for sure. But I think more of the question of this is a more complicated world, and I think
Mm.
that's really where I'm saying this is different than prior eras. And also, I think technology uh, has now demonstrated how powerful it really is. And in our point of view, most of that is really good. This is a good time to be alive.
Oh yeah, it's the
Um,
best time. It's the best time to build anything as well. I mean,
for
it's never been
100%.
easier. Never
Right.
been easier.
And I think so. But I think, again, coming back to this idea of permissionless innovation, it is not a gift we take very lightly, right? I think that is like a very sacred thing to protect.
Mm.
And I think some people say the way to protect that is to build great stuff. I mean, I think that's necessary, but not sufficient. I think another way to protect it is to build with speed and intention. And intention doesn't mean you're always going to get it right, but it means you're showing up in a different way than perhaps your predecessors did.
You're trying. You're giving it a shot. So when
Yeah, I
somebody comes to
mean,
you,
turns out effort matters.
yeah, what stage are typically these startups in when they come to you?
Yeah, I think we're seeing the most traction right now with earlier stage. I'd say seed, Series A, B. I mean, what
So
those stages mean.
pre-product.
Yeah, I would say pre-product market fit, maybe.
Mm.
Usually, like, if you come to us and you don't have a product, usually the first thing I say is like, go build something, right?
Right.
Like, go, don't get caught up in all these questions. Like, go build something, go try it out, go do some rudimentary customer discovery. But I would say once you have the inkling of a product, you're starting to get some signal from your customers. That's when I think there's more hunger and appetite, or again, perhaps you've just encountered some friction,
Right.
be it a
Because
regulatory.
like the moment your product meets the market, this is when the friction shows itself usually. Like
Exactly.
right away.
One thing, I'll give you an example. Like one thing we've heard a lot about right now is, we work with a bunch of, AI startups, and these are not like the household names. These are smaller companies, really trying to build applications in very, I wouldn't say niche areas, but very applied contexts. And often they're trying to sell to enterprise. And my sense of it, and maybe you have a different view, is enterprise acquisition of AI, particularly from startups, is slow. You have
Very
AI
slow.
committees. You've got
Super,
like
super slow.
procurement questionnaires that don't really meet the moment. You've got security reviews. You got like these AI committees with like 10 different stakeholders on the enterprise. I mean, the enterprises can't get out of their own way, even though they're under tremendous pressure to deploy.
Exactly.
And I think the idea that you take that force and you take a startup that actually needs to sell to enterprise to survive and grow and try and get feedback. And it's like, how do you move through that faster? Right. And I think one way to do it is, and the way we try to, I mean, obviously enterprises need to get themselves together. That's not our job so much. But I think what we try to coach startups is like, how do you proactively go into that negotiation? Because like in the old days, it was just like, does my product work and is the price right? And now it's like, does my product work? Is the price right? And for the enterprise, what basket of risks am I taking on? And I think we think about moving fast. Founders need to move fast. How do you show up proactively to that conversation? Let's talk about talent, right? Talent. I think we're seeing that obviously talent's at a premium right now in AI generally and emerging tech. And I think talent is not looking for sainthood, but I think they want a place with some set of values that aligns with their own. And I think the question that I'm always trying to work with founders on is your culture, is your vision, is your mission, is it like wall art, as I like to say? Or is it something that like your talent would look at, your customers would look at and be like, they probably believe that.
Right.
And I think the other feature I would just talk about is like trends here is, you and I are recording this as Davos is unfolding across the ocean. And, we're seeing our geopolitics continue to fragment.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean to put a normative spin if that's good or bad. It's just like, I think that's just a fact. And I think if you want to be a truly global company, I think you're going to have to think about that a lot earlier than you had to in prior generations. So these are the types of things that, again, probably matter more as you're starting to get traction. But it's important that I think, try to work with founders to find what is like the just right amount of preparation to help you look around corners.
So do you think
given all the things on your plate?
Yeah. So do you think that people or founders are getting more open to looking at things like this, or are they still sort of laser focused?
Well, I mean, I would just say honestly, it's like it's a mixed bag, right? Like this thing of responsible innovation is highly countercultural. I mean,
as soon as I heard the word, I thought to myself, nah, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I joke that, and I say this to founders all the time and investors too. It's like, I mean, it's like sort of like I say this with love to Silicon Valley, and I live in Seattle. Like I'd say this with love to the founders here. It's like, come on, guys and gals, like we pride ourselves on having like the whole business of being a founder is in itself, it's like being countercultural.
Exactly.
You see something that we don't see. And there's like, again, that is like such an incredible, beautiful instinct to build something like enduring. I think Steve Jobs said like something that makes a dent in the universe. Like that's a wonderful instinct. And that's, again, I think I love that. And the greatest part of my job is to sit with the founder and ask, what are you building? Why are you building it? And there is no conversation that doesn't bring me joy or pique my own curiosity. And it's just it's a gift for me to spend time with founders in that way. I think when you peel back the onion, I do think founders want to engage, but I have to work harder to reassure them that this is about speed. This is actually about making you move faster.
Yeah,
this is about reducing your. Yeah, and I think, of course, like if you've lived in an environment that is, in this sense, quite monoculture, right, where you sort of follow the herd without being, you don't take your product mindset to like your business building mindset sometimes, is what I've observed. And I want founders to kind of fully embrace their agency and their own power. Because I find like I've had founders tell me, it's like, well, I don't think my venture investors are going to, I don't want to get into that conversation with them. And it's like that old Spider-Man meme of like, have you ever seen like the Spider-Man kind of multiverse pointing at each other? Yeah. And it's like, it's like, well, I really need my investors to care. And then the investors are like, well, I don't know. The founders don't really care. And then the LPs are the ones writing the checks in the first place. And they're like, I don't know. I don't want to lose my allocation and pick a big fund.
Right.
And so it's like, these are brave people. These are generally people who have no fear. And I've just been shocked at how like fearful people are of getting into this topic. So that's the honest answer. I would say the one thing I take a lot of heart in is like these last few years, obviously we've seen this sort of like safety versus acceleration and I can't keep track of all the sort of tribal sort of camps right now. And it's like, at the end of the day, founders still have to make these decisions. They have to live with it. They have to sell. They have to hire. They have to bring and attract and retain talent. They don't want unnecessary friction. They want to build a great product, right? So privately, notwithstanding the countercultural side of this, founders keep showing up. They show up to our programs. They show up to our symposia. Like they're asking questions. They reach out privately. Investors reach out privately. Very few people want to talk about it publicly, for reasons I understand. But it maybe is actually a good time for us to be building this work because people are doing it out of their own volition, not because anybody's making them.
Awesome. So that leads me to our segment, Think Like a Futurist. So it's the year 2036, 10 years from now. It sounds as if this is actually going to sort of permeate more into the world and people are going to understand it better and do this more than they're doing it today. Or are you seeing other
That's
things?
the bet we're making. That's the bet we're making. I think the bet we're making is the founders that will outcompete others will do so in part because of product, in part because of business model, and because they're looking around corners in a more holistic way than they did in prior cycles. So that's certainly what I'd like to see. I mean, I'll give you a historical analogy is at the very beginning of the Industrial Revolution and manufacturing, the whole idea of quality was not something that was table stakes.
No.
But it turns out through a combination of factors in a complicated system, no serious CEO today of a truly global world-changing company says quality doesn't matter. Nobody says
it's interesting you should mention that because if you look at the time span between when it started and when quality became a thing, that's a long period of time.
It is, absolutely. We don't have that much time. I would argue. I point well taken, and I say we can't take that long. When I don't care if you call it responsibility, you call it something else. Like it just that same ethos.
Yes.
Really should be the hallmark. And frankly, people will pay for it. I mean, I think as we've seen with quality in manufacturing, people pay for it. They not only expect it, but they're willing to pay a premium for it. So there are business reasons to do it and also de-risks you in other ways. So I think from what do I like to see in 2036 in the ecosystem would be this idea of responsibility becoming table stakes, not just in the sort of winner. I mean, let me take it back. It should become table stakes to advance as you're scaling. And I think that's really going to be more and more important. And I also think geopolitically, the world will demand that. And I see that as a trend. Now, I mean, I know we were talking before of what the vision of 2036 is. And like, there's an optimistic version of that, and there's a dark version of that. And I think for the purposes of this recording, I'll try to stay with my optimistic side. But my hope is that let's say not just AI, but how will AI start showing up in the physical world? I don't think. I mean, even if AI stopped today, of course, it would change a lot of how we think and work in ways we're only scratching the surface of. But the sort of it sparks the imagination to think of AI and robotics meeting, and if we can get that right, both on the delivery of that, but also ensuring that those technologies can be deployed responsibly, like that has profound consequences for how we live, how do we work, how do we coexist, how do we spend our time. And I think the word, I do like the word flourishing. I do want to see, and I don't believe we can get to some better form of human flourishing without technology. I don't think that's possible. It may not be the only thing.
That is the point of technology, isn't it? I mean, it's so funny because people are like, when they push back, technology's point is to lift our burdens, right? To help us flourish. At least that's in my perspective.
I mean, in my spiritual heart, that's what it should be for. I do know enough builders and founders to know that there's joy for people in just building the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think so, like I don't begrudge anybody that. Like some people just want to build, and like that's where they find joy in this world. That is their way of like contributing and finding meaning. And I think for those of us who are not builders, I think we want those technologies to make my life better, not harder.
Right.
And I think that's been the net over human history, but it's not a pattern I take as a given. Because with anything with human history, like, doesn't take much for things to go sideways, or to set us back. I mean, we've seen many centuries, in sort of the last 2,000 years where there was no progress.
Right.
Notwithstanding maybe some desire to build or tinker or what have you. So my vision for 2036 is more human flourishing for more people, in more places, at less cost. I mean, I think that would be sort of like, that would be the dream. And how do we build technology that is truly consequential and not just giving me more reasons to spend time on my phone or in isolation from one another.
Exactly.
We
really need
this. Trapped in my home, but it increases cohesion and relationships or independence and freedom, agency. I mean, I believe hard work is super important to anybody. I think that's a really important value. And I appreciate that people are out here trying to want to automate every part of work. Okay, I can see some value in that. That might actually lead to some flourishing, but it's not like people are going to want to sit around. So how do we think about that, right? People want to apply their talents. They want to provide for their families. And I think that's part of excellence. And I think I see that all throughout the startup ecosystem. We pride ourselves on hard work.
Yeah.
So I think these are the questions I'm thinking about.
We need to build those kind of systems so that can happen. Because right now we're not building those types of systems, but I think we're starting to think about building those types of systems where you can continue to, instead of doing the burdensome work, because this is what I feel is happening now. It's like human beings are doing the burdensome work and the AI is doing the interesting work. It's like we need to switch this around and let the AI do the burdensome work and let the humans do the interesting work and pay us more for the interesting work. But we need the systems to come into play for those things to happen.
Oh yeah, and that's where I think like AI and robotics is. There are some jobs that do provide a lot of meaning for people and are also unsafe.
Exactly.
And are not a good use of people's time and physical talents. And so there is a great role to play. And I think those robotics companies are starting to tell that story. I also think they're going to encounter friction because people will see that as a threat to their livelihood.
Yep.
And so this is a way for technology to make human life better, but there won't be friction, not because people are sort of, have malintent, but because work matters to people. It matters to identity. And I think, again, startups who only think of themselves as building a great product and not understanding how that shows up in people's lives are, I think, fundamentally doing their business a disservice, and they're doing their vision a disservice.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much. So if somebody wants to get in touch
thanks for having me, Chris. Appreciate it.
If someone wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
Probably email is best. GAURAB as in boy at RILabs.org. You can find me on LinkedIn, Gaurab Bansal, at Responsible Innovation Labs. But I think email is probably best. GAURAB at RILabs.org.
Awesome. Well, I'll put all the links in the show notes so people can go direct. Thank you so much. Very interesting.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate you. Bye.
Talk to you later. Thanks.
Bye.
Pixels and philosophies merge and mold, a future untold, unseen.